At Christmas, I was caring for my sick daughter-in-law, but then I heard her whisper something that changed everything forever. If she dies, we'll be rich. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share, and if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a small apartment in Queens, New York, where the subway rumbles beneath my feet every morning at 6:15, and the smell of Mrs. Chen's dumplings drifts through paper-thin walls. For most of my life, I believed that love meant sacrifice. I believed that being a mother, a grandmother, meant giving until there was nothing left. I believed that family came first, always, even when that family forgot I existed until they needed something. The morning I'm about to tell you about started like any other December day. The radiator clanged its familiar tune, fighting against the bitter cold seeping through my windows. I wrapped my grandmother's worn shawl around my shoulders, the same shawl that had comforted 3 generations of women in my family. The fabric was thin now, frayed at the edges, much like I felt most mornings. I made my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years, watching the steam rise while outside, the city began its daily dance of car horns and hurried footsteps. But that morning was different. That morning, I received a text from my son David that would begin the most painful chapter of my life. "Mom, Anna's in the hospital again. Can you come? We need you." "No, please. No, how are you feeling? Just need." That's all I ever was to them anymore. A need to be filled. I stared at that message for a long time, sitting at my small kitchen table covered with unpaid bills and prescription bottles. Through my window, I could see the neighbors hanging Christmas lights, their children running in circles on the sidewalk below, their laughter mixing with the distant sound of traffic. I should have felt joy watching them. Instead, I felt hollow, like a vessel that had been poured out too many times. Anna had been sick for almost a year. It started with fatigue, then came the doctor's visits, the tests, the uncertainty. My son met her 5 years ago at a coffee shop in Manhattan, and I welcomed her into our family with open arms. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and bright green eyes that seemed to light up any room. She called me Mom from the very beginning, something that made my heart swell with happiness. I had lost my husband 10 years earlier, and having Anna felt like gaining a daughter I never had. But illness has a way of changing people. Or maybe it just reveals who they really were all along. I took the subway to Mount Sinai that morning, clutching my purse against my chest as the train swayed through tunnels beneath the city. The familiar smell of metal and humanity surrounded me, but I felt more alone than ever. Other passengers buried their faces in phones or newspapers, everyone lost in their own worlds. I wondered how many of them had families who only called when they needed something. How many of them knew what it felt like to be invisible until it was time to pay a bill or provide free labor. At the hospital, I found Anna in room 412, her face pale against the white pillows. She looked smaller than I remembered, frailer, but her eyes still held that spark I had first noticed years ago. Only now, that spark seemed different somehow, sharper, more calculating. "Oh, Mom," she said when she saw me, reaching out with trembling hands. "I'm so glad you're here. I've been so scared." Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion, and immediately I felt guilty for any doubts I'd been harboring. This was my daughter-in-law, my family, lying sick in a hospital bed. Of course I should be there. David stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the gray December sky. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his usually neat hair disheveled. "Mom, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, but he didn't meet my eyes. "The doctors want to keep her for observation. Someone needs to be here with her during the day while I'm at work." And just like that, without being asked, I became Anna's full-time caregiver. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, medication schedules, and sleepless nights. I moved through my days like a ghost, waking before sunrise to make the journey from Queens to Manhattan, spending 8 to 10 hours at Anna's bedside, then returning home exhausted to an empty apartment and a refrigerator full of food I was too tired to eat. Anna's condition seemed to improve, then worsen, then improve again. The doctors couldn't give us clear answers, which only added to the stress and uncertainty. She would have good days where she seemed almost like her old self, joking and laughing, making plans for when she got better. Then she would have bad days where she could barely keep her eyes open, where every breath seemed to require enormous effort. During those long hours at the hospital, I got to know every detail of that sterile room, the way the afternoon light fell across the floor at exactly 2:30, the sound of the nurses' sneakers squeaking against the linoleum in the hallway, the mechanical beep of the machines monitoring Anna's vital signs. I memorized the pattern of the wallpaper, counted the ceiling tiles, and learned which vending machine had the least stale coffee. But what I remember most clearly were the conversations, or rather, the lack of them. Anna slept a lot during those first weeks, or pretended to sleep. I would sit in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside her bed, reading magazines I didn't care about, or working on crossword puzzles that seemed impossible to solve. Sometimes I would catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she did talk, it was usually about practical things, insurance forms that needed to be filled out, bills that needed to be paid, medications that needed to be picked up from the pharmacy. Never about how I was feeling, whether I was tired, if I needed a break. I was just there to serve a function, like a piece of furniture that happened to have hands and feet. My own health began to suffer. My arthritis flared up from sitting in that hard hospital chair for hours every day. I developed a persistent cough that I couldn't shake. My blood pressure medication ran out, but I kept forgetting to call my doctor for a refill because all my mental energy was focused on Anna's needs. I lost 15 pounds that I couldn't afford to lose, my clothes hanging loose on my already small frame. But I told myself this was temporary. Anna would get better, life would return to normal, and my family would remember that I was a person with needs and feelings of my own. I held on to that hope like a lifeline, even as everything else began to unravel. The first crack in my faith came in early November. Anna had been asking me to help with their finances while she was sick, and I agreed without hesitation. I had always been good with numbers, had managed my late husband's business books for 30 years. It seemed like a natural way to help. But when I sat down with their bank statements and bills, what I found made my stomach turn. They were living far beyond their means, with credit card debt that reached well into 6 figures. They owned stocks and investments I didn't even know existed, including some cryptocurrency that David had apparently been trading without telling Anna. Their monthly expenses were more than my yearly income, and yet they seemed to have no plan for paying any of it back. What bothered me more than the debt itself was the way they had hidden it from me. All those times they had asked me for money over the years, small amounts they claimed were for emergencies or unexpected expenses, I had believed they were going through temporary rough patches. Now I realized they had been living this way for years, spending money they didn't have and relying on loans from family members to stay afloat. I had given them thousands of dollars over the past 5 years. Money from my retirement savings, money from selling my mother's jewelry, money I had set aside for my own medical needs and emergencies. Money I would never see again. When I tried to bring up the financial situation with David, he became defensive immediately. "Mom, you don't understand how expensive everything is now," he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "We're doing the best we can. Anna's medical bills are killing us." But the medical bills weren't the problem. Their insurance was actually quite good, covering most of Anna's treatment costs. The problem was the lifestyle they had built on borrowed money and borrowed time, a house of cards that was finally starting to collapse. I wanted to ask why they needed a 3-bedroom apartment in Manhattan when they could live more affordably in Queens or Brooklyn. I wanted to ask about the expensive dinners I saw charged to their credit cards, the designer clothes in Anna's closet, the vacation to Europe they had taken just months before she got sick. But every time I opened my mouth to voice these concerns, I stopped myself. Anna was sick. This wasn't the time to start family arguments about money, or so I told myself. The turning point came 3 weeks before Christmas. Anna had been released from the hospital but was still weak and needed constant care. David couldn't take any more time off work, so I volunteered to stay with her during the day. This meant taking the subway from Queens to their apartment in Manhattan every morning, a journey that took over an hour each way. Their apartment was beautiful, I had to admit. High ceilings, hardwood floors, windows that looked out over Central Park. It was the kind of place I had dreamed of living in when I was young, before I learned that dreams like that were for other people. But now, knowing what I knew about their finances, the beauty felt hollow. Every expensive detail seemed to mock the debt that was hidden behind it. Anna's behavior during those weeks was strange and inconsistent. Some days she seemed genuinely grateful for my help, thanking me for making soup or helping her to the bathroom. Other days she was cold and distant, barely acknowledging my presence. She would spend hours on her phone, texting or talking to people I didn't recognize, and when I asked who she was speaking with, she would give vague answers or change the subject. I began to notice things. Small things at first. The way she would quickly close her laptop when I entered the room. The hushed phone conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked by. The way she and David would exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking, as if they were communicating in a secret language I wasn't meant to understand. One afternoon, while Anna was napping, I was cleaning their kitchen and found a folder full of papers shoved behind the microwave. I shouldn't have looked, I know that. But something about the way it was hidden made my curiosity overwhelm my sense of privacy. Inside were life insurance policies. Multiple policies with substantial payouts, and my name was on several of them as a beneficiary, right alongside David's. But there were also newer documents, applications for additional coverage, and what looked like correspondence with insurance agents about increasing the payout amounts. My hands shook as I read through the papers. They had been planning for Anna's death, calculating how much money they would receive, discussing how to maximize the insurance payouts. And they had been including me in these plans without my knowledge, making me complicit in what felt like a ghoulish form of financial planning. I put the papers back exactly where I found them and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to act normal. But inside, I felt sick. Was Anna really as sick as she appeared to be? Were the doctors telling the truth about her condition? And why was everyone so focused on what would happen if she died, instead of working toward helping her live? That night, I lay awake in my small bed in Queens, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city outside my window. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to consider a possibility that I had been pushing away. What if my family was using me? What if all the sacrifice and caregiving and financial support was just a way for them to get what they needed while giving me nothing in return? The thought was so painful that I actually gasped out loud in the darkness of my bedroom. Because if it was true, then what did that make me? What did that say about my worth as a person, as a mother, as a human being? I had spent my entire adult life believing that love was measured by sacrifice. That being a good mother meant giving everything I had, even when it hurt. That family loyalty meant never questioning, never demanding reciprocal treatment, never expecting anything in return. But lying there in the dark, listening to sirens wail in the distance, I began to wonder if I had confused love with martyrdom, family with exploitation. The next few days passed in a strange haze. I continued my routine of caring for Anna, but now every interaction felt different. When she asked me to bring her tea, I wondered if she was really too weak to get it herself. When she complained about feeling dizzy, I found myself studying her face for signs of deception. When she thanked me for my help, the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. I began to pay attention to things I had previously overlooked. The way Anna's symptoms seemed to worsen whenever David was around, but improved when it was just the two of us. The way she managed to spend hours on social media when she claimed to be too tired to shower or prepare her own meals. The way she would suddenly perk up when certain friends called, laughing and chatting energetically, only to claim exhaustion again the moment the call ended. Was I losing my mind? Was the stress of caregiving making me paranoid and suspicious? Or was I finally seeing clearly for the first time in months? The answer came on December 22nd, just 3 days before Christmas. Anna had been having what she called a bad day, staying in bed and asking me to handle everything from bringing her meals to answering the phone. David had left early that morning for what he said was an important meeting at work, promising to be back by evening. I spent the day moving quietly around their apartment, trying to anticipate Anna's needs while she dozed fitfully. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was in the kitchen making her some chicken soup when I heard voices from the bedroom. At first, I assumed Anna was having another phone conversation, something that had become routine during her illness. But as I moved closer to deliver the soup, I realized there were 2 voices in the room. Anna was talking to someone who had come to visit. I paused outside the bedroom door, not wanting to interrupt what might be an important conversation with a friend or family member. That's when I heard my grandson Bobby's voice, David's 18-year-old son from his first marriage. Bobby had been supportive throughout Anna's illness, visiting regularly and helping with small tasks around the apartment. "Grandma Margaret looks so tired," Bobby was saying, his young voice full of concern. "Maybe she should take a break. This is too much for someone her age." I felt a warm rush of affection for my grandson. Finally, someone was thinking about my well-being. Noticing the toll this situation was taking on me, I was about to knock on the door and join the conversation when Anna's response stopped me cold. "Don't worry about her," Anna said, her voice much stronger and clearer than it had been all day. "She's tougher than she looks. And besides, we need her right now. If she dies before this is all over, we'll be rich enough to hire professional help." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, nearly dropping the bowl of soup I was carrying. Had I heard correctly? Had Anna just talked about my death as if it were a business opportunity? "What do you mean?" Bobby asked, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "Your grandmother has a substantial life insurance policy," Anna explained matter-of-factly, "plus her savings, her apartment, everything she's been putting aside for years. When she dies, it all goes to your father as her only child. We've been planning for this." My legs felt weak. I leaned against the wall for support, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it from inside the bedroom. "But Grandma's not that old," Bobby protested. And she seems healthy. Anna laughed, a sound that was nothing like the weak, pained laughter I had been hearing for months. This laugh was sharp, calculating. She's 73 and wearing herself out taking care of me, Anna said. Look at her. She's lost weight. She's constantly tired. She's not taking care of her own health. At her age, with all this stress, it's only a matter of time. And when it happens, we'll have enough money to pay off all our debts and still have plenty left over. I felt like I might vomit. This woman I had been caring for, sacrificing my own health and well-being for, was sitting in her bedroom calculating the financial benefits of my death, and my own son was apparently part of this plan. That seems kind of cold, Bobby said quietly, and I wanted to hug him for those words. It's not cold, it's practical, Anna replied, her voice taking on a harder edge. She's going to die eventually anyway. At least this way, her death will mean something. It will solve our problems and give us a fresh start. I couldn't listen to anymore. I backed away from the door on unsteady legs, made my way to the kitchen, and set the soup bowl down with shaking hands. My vision was blurry, and I realized I was crying without making any sound. Silent tears that felt like they were being squeezed from some deep, wounded place inside me. For several minutes, I just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter and trying to process what I had heard. Then, like a dam breaking, all the doubts and suspicions I had been harboring for weeks came flooding out. The hidden financial documents, Anna's inconsistent symptoms, the way David avoided my eyes when discussing their money problems, the life insurance policies with my name on them. They weren't just using me as free labor and financial support. They were literally counting on my death to solve their problems. And they were doing everything they could to make sure that death came sooner rather than later by working me into the ground. I heard movement from the bedroom and quickly tried to compose myself. A few minutes later, Bobby emerged, his young face troubled and uncertain. When he saw me, he looked startled, as if he was wondering how much I might have overheard. "Hi, Grandma," he said awkwardly. "I was just visiting Anna. She seems to be feeling a little better today." I looked at my grandson, this boy I had helped raise after his mother died, and wondered what he was thinking. Was he horrified by what Anna had said? Or was he already calculating his own inheritance? "That's nice, dear," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady. "Would you like some soup? I made plenty." He shook his head quickly. "No, thanks. I need to get home. Dad's picking me up downstairs." After Bobby left, I went through the motions of caring for Anna for the rest of the afternoon. I brought her the soup, helped her to the bathroom, adjusted her pillows, and listened to her complain about various aches and pains. But now every gesture felt different. Every word of thanks sounded like a lie. Every request for help felt like another step in their plan to drain me dry. That evening, when David returned from work, I watched him carefully. The way he kissed Anna's forehead and asked about her day. The way he thanked me for being there. The way he offered to drive me home, as if he was this considerate son who cared about my well-being. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked as we sat in traffic on the way back to Queens. "I know this has been hard on you." I wanted to confront him right then. I wanted to ask him about the life insurance policies, about the financial planning that included my death, about whether he saw me as a mother or just as an eventual inheritance. But sitting in his car, looking at his profile in the glow of the streetlights, I realized I wasn't ready for that conversation. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what I was going to do with this terrible knowledge. "I'm managing," I said instead. "Just worried about Anna." He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "She's lucky to have you. We both are." The words that might once have filled me with warmth now felt like salt in an open wound. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by all the familiar objects that represented my life. My late husband's reading chair, the photo albums full of family memories, the small treasures I had collected over 7 decades of living. And for the first time, I began to see them not as cherished possessions, but as items in an inventory, things that would be cataloged and distributed after my death, things that my family was already counting on owning. I thought about all the money I had given David and Anna over the years, the thousands of dollars that had come from selling my mother's jewelry, my grandmother's china, pieces of my history that I had parted with because I believed I was helping my family through difficult times. Now I understood that I had simply been funding their lifestyle while they waited for me to die so they could access the rest. The manipulation was so complete, so thorough, that I almost had to admire its effectiveness. They had made me complicit in my own exploitation. They had convinced me that my worth as a mother, as a person, was measured by how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice, how much of myself I could pour out for others. And while I was emptying myself for them, they were calculating the value of what would be left when I was gone. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Anna's voice talking about my death as if it were a stock option they were waiting to cash in. I saw David's face, wondering how long he had been thinking of me not as his mother, but as his financial future. I thought about Bobby, hoping that his youth and confusion would protect him from becoming fully complicit in this grotesque plan. But mostly, I thought about myself, about the woman I had become over the past months of caregiving and sacrifice. I had lost weight, developed new health problems, isolated myself from friends, and abandoned my own needs and interests. I had turned myself into exactly the kind of elderly woman who might be expected to die from stress and overwork. Without even realizing it, I had been cooperating with their plan. The next morning was December 23rd. I woke earlier than usual and sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and staring out at the gray sky. It was supposed to snow later in the day. The weather forecasters promised a white Christmas for New York City. Under normal circumstances, I would have been excited about the prospect of snow, about spending the holiday with my family, about watching Bobby open presents and sharing a meal with people I loved. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only an empty shell. But as I sat there, something began to shift inside me. Maybe it was anger, finally surfacing after being buried under months of obligation and self-sacrifice. Maybe it was self-preservation, some instinct that had been dormant too long. Or maybe it was just exhaustion with being treated as if my only value was what I could provide for others. Whatever it was, I felt something harden inside my chest, a resolve I hadn't experienced in years. I was not going to be their victim anymore. I was not going to work myself to death so they could inherit my money. I was not going to pretend that their love was real when it was clearly conditional on my usefulness. And I was definitely not going to spend Christmas playing the role of the grateful, selfless grandmother while they counted down the days until my funeral. I picked up my phone and called David. When he answered, I could hear the sounds of their apartment in the background, morning television, and Anna's voice asking for something. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice, or what I had always interpreted as concern, but now recognized might be worry about their free labor not showing up. "I won't be coming over today," I said simply. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "Anna needs you. We talked about this." "Anna needs professional care," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not an elderly woman who's wearing herself out trying to help. I think it's time you hired someone qualified." "Mom, we can't afford—" "Then figure it out," I interrupted, something I had never done before in any conversation with my son. "But I won't be coming today, or tomorrow, or any day until we have a very serious conversation about some things I've discovered." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been dropped. "What kind of things?" David finally asked, his voice careful and guarded. "Life insurance policies," I said simply. "Financial planning that includes my death. Conversations about how much money you'll have when I'm gone." I heard him suck in a sharp breath. "Mom, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I said. "But not today. Today, I'm taking care of myself for the first time in months. We'll talk after Christmas." I hung up before he could respond. For the next several minutes, I sat staring at my phone, half expecting it to ring immediately with David calling back to argue or explain or manipulate me into changing my mind. But the phone stayed silent, and gradually I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: relief. I spent December 23rd doing things I had forgotten I enjoyed. I took a long bath with lavender salts I had bought months earlier but never had time to use. I made myself a proper breakfast with eggs and toast and fresh orange juice, eating slowly at my kitchen table while reading a book instead of rushing to get ready to care for someone else. I called my neighbor Margaret, the retired nurse who lived 2 doors down, and accepted her invitation to join her for afternoon tea. Margaret was 81 years old, with bright silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. We had been friendly neighbors for years, but I had been too busy with family obligations to maintain any real friendship. "You look terrible," she said bluntly when she opened her door. But her tone was warm and concerned. "When was the last time you had a proper meal or a full night's sleep?" Sitting in Margaret's cozy apartment, surrounded by plants and books and the smell of bergamot tea, I found myself telling her everything. About Anna's illness, about the months of caregiving, about the financial documents I had discovered, and finally about the conversation I had overheard between Anna and Bobby. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding or outrage. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "You know," she said finally, "in 30 years of nursing, I saw a lot of families dealing with serious illness, and I learned to recognize the difference between people who are genuinely sick and people who are performing sickness for some kind of gain." She looked at me directly, her blue eyes intense. What you're describing doesn't sound like someone who's dying, Margaret. It sounds like someone who's discovered that being sick gets her a lot of attention, financial support, and free labor from people who love her. The words hit me like a revelation. I had been so focused on being the perfect caregiver that I had never questioned whether Anna's illness was as serious as it appeared to be. I had never asked to speak to her doctors directly, never requested copies of test results, never wondered why her symptoms seemed to fluctuate so conveniently. But the doctors, I started to say. What exactly have the doctors told you? Margaret asked. Have you spoken to them yourself, or have you only heard about Anna's condition through David and Anna? I realized that every piece of medical information I had received had been filtered through my family. I had never spoken directly to any of Anna's healthcare providers, never been included in any medical consultations, never seen any official documentation of her diagnosis or treatment plan. They said I wasn't immediate family, I explained, but even as I said it, I realized how strange that was. Anna had been calling me mom for years, had supposedly considered me her closest family member, had been depending on me for daily care. Why wouldn't she want me to speak directly to her medical team? Margaret nodded grimly. Convenient excuse to keep you from getting information that might contradict their story. That afternoon, Margaret helped me do some research online. We looked up Anna's supposed condition, read about typical symptoms and treatment protocols, and compared what we found to what I had observed during months of caregiving. The inconsistencies were glaring once I started looking for them. Anna's symptoms didn't match the typical progression of her alleged illness. Her energy levels and cognitive function were far too good for someone who was supposedly as sick as she claimed to be. And most tellingly, her condition seemed to worsen dramatically whenever David was around or whenever they needed something from me, but improved significantly when she thought no one was watching. I think you've been played, Margaret said gently, and I think you need to protect yourself before this goes any further. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since this whole ordeal began. I cooked myself a proper dinner, opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion, and sat down to think clearly about my situation. The more I thought about it, the more obvious the pattern became. Anna's illness had begun shortly after I had mentioned to David that I was considering updating my will. The severity of her condition had escalated whenever their financial situation became more desperate, and the focus on my involvement in her care had intensified after they discovered how much I was worth through various life insurance policies and investments they had helped me set up. They had been playing a long game, using Anna's supposed illness to manipulate me into exhausting myself physically and financially while they waited for me to die. And I had been such a perfect victim that they had grown careless, talking openly about their plans because they never imagined I might be listening. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the evening, first from David, then from Anna, then from David again. They wanted to know what was wrong, why I was upset, whether I was feeling okay. They offered to come check on me, to bring me dinner, to discuss whatever was bothering me. But I noticed that none of their messages actually addressed the things I had mentioned on the phone. None of them acknowledged the life insurance policies or the financial planning that included my death. They were trying to smooth things over without actually confronting what I had discovered. I didn't respond to any of the messages. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke up feeling more rested than I had in months. For the first time since Anna's illness began, I had slept through the night without waking up worried about medication schedules or emergency phone calls. My body felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the city waking up on Christmas Eve morning. Snow had begun to fall during the night, just as the weather forecasters had promised, and the world outside my window looked clean and fresh and full of possibility. I was supposed to spend Christmas Eve at David and Anna's apartment, helping with meal preparations and gift wrapping, playing the role of the devoted mother and grandmother. Instead, I was sitting in my own home, accountable to no one but myself for the first time in months. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Bobby standing in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He was wearing the winter coat I had bought him for his birthday last year, and his face was red from the cold. I opened the door, and he looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of David at that age that my heart clenched. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. "Dad sent me to check on you. He's worried because you didn't answer your phone last night." I stepped aside to let him in, noting that he seemed uncomfortable, as if he wasn't sure what he was supposed to say or do. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" I asked. "It's cold outside." He nodded gratefully, and I busied myself in the kitchen while he shed his coat and settled at my small table. As I heated milk and stirred in cocoa powder, I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He kept glancing around my apartment as if he was seeing it for the first time, taking in the family photos and personal mementos that told the story of my life. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice hesitant, Are you mad at me? I set the mug of hot chocolate in front of him and sat down across the table. Why would you think I'm mad at you? He stared down at his hands. Because of what Anna said yesterday. About you and the money and stuff. I didn't know what to say. So he was troubled by that conversation. That was something, at least. What do you think about what she said? I asked gently. Bobby was quiet for a long time, warming his hands around the mug. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were full of confusion and something that might have been shame. I think it was mean, he said quietly. You're not that old, and you're not going to die just because you're tired. And even if something happened to you, we shouldn't be talking about it like it's a good thing because of money. I felt tears prick my eyes. This 18-year-old boy had more moral clarity than his father and stepmother combined. What did your father say when you told him about that conversation? I asked. Bobby's face flushed red. I didn't tell him. Anna made me promise not to repeat what she said. She said it would upset Dad and cause family problems. Of course she did. Anna was smart enough to know that even David might be disturbed by the coldness of her calculations, so she was keeping the most damaging conversations secret from him. Bobby, I said carefully, what do you know about Anna's illness? Have you talked to her doctors? Do you understand what's supposed to be wrong with her? He shook his head. Dad doesn't talk about it much. He just says she's really sick and might not get better. But when I'm around her, she seems okay most of the time. Like, she can do things and talk normally and stuff. She doesn't seem like she's dying. Out of the mouths of babes. Bobby's instincts were better than mine had been, probably because he wasn't blinded by guilt and obligation the way I was. We talked for another hour, and gradually I began to understand that Bobby had been having doubts about the whole situation for weeks. He had noticed the inconsistencies in Anna's behavior, the way her symptoms seemed to come and go conveniently, the focus on financial planning rather than medical treatment. But he was 18 years old, dealing with a complicated family situation, and he didn't know how to voice his concerns to the adults in his life. I'm not mad at you, I told him before he left, but I am disappointed in your father and Anna, and I'm not going to continue to be part of whatever they're planning. He nodded solemnly. Are you still going to be my grandmother? The question broke my heart. Of course I am. You'll always be my grandson, no matter what happens with your father. But I might not be around as much for a while. I need to take care of myself and figure some things out. After Bobby left, I spent the rest of Christmas Eve doing something I hadn't done in years. I took care of myself. I made my favorite soup, watched old movies, and called a few friends I had been neglecting during the months of caregiving. I wrapped the presents I had bought for my family, even though I wasn't sure when or if I would give them. That evening, as snow continued to fall outside my windows, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few days earlier. I was not going to spend Christmas Day with David and Anna. I was not going to pretend that everything was normal, while they calculated the financial benefits of my death. I was not going to sacrifice one more day of my life for people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Instead, I was going to spend Christmas with my neighbor Margaret, who had invited me to join her and her adult daughter for dinner. I was going to sit at a table where I was valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. I was going to eat food I didn't have to prepare and clean up dishes I didn't have to wash. I was going to remember what it felt like to be treated like a guest rather than unpaid help. It felt like the most radical thing I had ever done. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the snow from the night before sparkling in the sunlight like scattered diamonds. I woke up naturally, without an alarm clock, and lay in bed for several minutes, just enjoying the sensation of being rested. When was the last time I had slept until I was finished sleeping, rather than waking up to someone else's schedule? My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, all from David and Anna. They were increasingly frantic, demanding to know where I was, why I wasn't answering, whether I was okay. The final message, sent at 2 in the morning, was from David. Mom, if you don't respond by tomorrow morning, I'm calling the police to do a wellness check. I realized that they had never considered the possibility that I might simply choose not to be available to them. In their minds, I was always on call, always accessible, always ready to drop everything for their needs. The idea that I might have my own plans, my own preferences, my own right to privacy was apparently inconceivable to them. I made coffee, took a long shower, and put on my best dress, the navy blue one with small flowers that my husband had always said made my eyes look bright. I hadn't worn it in over a year, hadn't had any occasion that seemed worthy of my best clothes. But if I was going to spend Christmas reclaiming my dignity, I was going to do it properly dressed. At 11 o'clock, just as I was getting ready to leave for Margaret's apartment, there was loud knocking at my door. Not the tentative knock Bobby had used the day before, but the demanding knock of someone who expected immediate attention. I looked through the peephole and saw David standing in the hallway, His hair was disheveled, his face was flushed, and he was wearing the same clothes he had worn the day before. He looked like he hadn't slept, which probably meant Anna had kept him up all night worrying about their missing caregiver. I opened the door, but left the chain lock engaged so it would only open a few inches. "Mom, thank God," he said, relief flooding his voice. "We've been trying to reach you for hours. Why haven't you been answering your phone?" "Because I don't want to talk to you right now," I said simply. His relief immediately turned to frustration. "What's going on?" "Anna's worried sick about you. We thought something might have happened." "I'm sure Anna's very concerned," I said dryly, "especially since she was counting on me to die soon so you could inherit my money." David's face went white. For a moment, he opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, unable to form words. "Mom, that's not… we never… I heard her talking to Bobby," I said, "about my life insurance policies, about how my death would solve all your financial problems, about how I'm working myself to death taking care of her. So don't stand there and tell me it's not what you think, because I know exactly what you think." David leaned against the doorframe as if his legs might not support him. "Can I come in, please?" "Let me explain." I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "I'm leaving for Christmas dinner with friends. We can talk later if you want to have an honest conversation about what's been happening. But not today. Mom, you can't do this. Anna needs you. She's having a bad day, she's asking for you. She doesn't understand why you're not there." Something about his tone, the automatic assumption that Anna's needs trumped everything else, that my presence was something they were entitled to rather than something I chose to give, made my resolve harden even further. "Anna will survive one day without me," I said firmly. "She survived her entire life without me up until a year ago. She can manage 24 hours while you figure out alternative care arrangements. We can't afford…" "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you started spending money you didn't have and planning for my death to solve your problems," I interrupted. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, leaving David standing in the hallway. Christmas dinner at Margaret's was a revelation. Her daughter Susan was a warm, intelligent woman in her 50s who worked as a social worker and had fascinating stories about her clients and cases. Margaret herself was a wonderful cook, and the meal she prepared was elaborate and delicious without being the kind of production that required one person to sacrifice their entire day in the kitchen. But what struck me most was the way they talked to each other, and to me. There was genuine interest in each other's opinions and experiences. There was laughter that wasn't tinged with stress or obligation. There was comfortable silence that didn't feel charged with unspoken resentments. "You seem lighter today," Margaret observed as we cleared the dinner dishes. "More like yourself." I realized she was right. For the first time in months, I felt like myself, rather than like a role I was playing. I wasn't the long-suffering caregiver or the selfless mother or the grateful elderly woman who should be thankful for any scraps of attention her family threw her way. I was just Margaret, a person with thoughts and feelings and preferences that mattered. "I think I've been carrying around weight that wasn't mine to carry," I said. Susan nodded knowingly. "I see that a lot in my work. Family members who take on responsibility for other people's choices and problems until they lose themselves completely. It's a hard pattern to break, especially for women of your generation who were taught that self-sacrifice was the highest virtue." That evening, I returned to my apartment feeling more hopeful than I had in a very long time. I had proven to myself that I could survive, even thrive, without organizing my entire life around other people's needs. I had remembered what it felt like to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. My phone showed 42 missed calls. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. David came to my door multiple times, sometimes bringing Bobby, sometimes bringing flowers or food, always with increasingly desperate pleas for me to return to my caregiving duties. Anna left voicemails that alternated between playing the victim and outright manipulation, claiming that her condition was worsening without my care, that she didn't trust professional nurses, that I was the only person who understood her needs. But I had learned something important on Christmas Day. Their desperation wasn't really about Anna's health needs. It was about the loss of free labor, free financial support, and free emotional management of their problems. They could hire professional care if they really needed it. They could figure out their own financial situation if they were truly motivated. They could learn to manage Anna's real or imagined symptoms without my constant presence. What they couldn't do was replace the unique combination of guilt, obligation, and love that had made me such a perfect victim for their exploitation. On December 28th, I received a call that changed everything. It was from Anna's primary care physician, Dr. Rodriguez, a woman I had never met but had heard about for months. She explained that Anna had listed me as an emergency contact and person authorized to receive medical information. "I'm calling because Anna missed her appointment yesterday. And when we tried to reach her, your son said she was too sick to come in, Dr. Rodriguez explained. But according to our records, Anna hasn't had any significant medical issues for the past 6 months. Her last tests were all normal, and we've been reducing her medications because her symptoms have resolved. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. What do you mean, resolved? Anna's condition was never life-threatening, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. She had some hormonal imbalances and stress-related symptoms that were causing fatigue and discomfort, but we've had those under control with medication for months. She should be able to function normally. In fact, I've been encouraging her to return to work and regular activities. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, trying to process what I was hearing. So, she's not seriously ill? No more than anyone else her age dealing with normal health issues. Nothing that would require extensive care or prevent her from taking care of herself. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. The conversation with Dr. Rodriguez confirmed what I had been beginning to suspect, but hadn't wanted to believe. Anna's illness, the crisis that had consumed my life for months, was largely a performance designed to extract maximum benefit from my misplaced sense of family obligation. But what hurt most was the realization that David had to know this. He had been going to medical appointments, speaking with doctors, managing insurance claims. There was no way he could have been unaware that Anna's condition wasn't serious enough to require the level of care I had been providing, which meant my own son had been complicit in a scheme to exploit my love, my time, and my health for their financial benefit. That afternoon, I called a lawyer Margaret had recommended, a woman who specialized in elder abuse and financial exploitation. I made an appointment to discuss my situation and explore what legal protections might be available to prevent my family from accessing my assets or making medical decisions on my behalf. I also called my bank and my insurance agent to review all my accounts and policies, looking for any signs that David or Anna had been accessing funds or information without my knowledge. What I discovered made me sick to my stomach. Over the past year, David had been using a power of attorney document I had signed years earlier to access my investment accounts. Small amounts at first, transactions that could be explained as legitimate expenses related to my care or Anna's medical needs. But the pattern was clear. They had been systematically draining my assets while simultaneously planning to inherit the rest when I died. The total amount they had taken was over $60,000. I had been funding their lifestyle and paying for their scheme to exploit me, using my own money. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since I was young. I got angry. Not the quiet, disappointed anger I had felt when I discovered their financial problems or overheard Anna's calculations about my death. This was a hot, pure rage that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body like fire. I had spent months sacrificing my health, my happiness, and my financial security for people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be consumed. I had worn myself down to nothing, trying to help people who were actively plotting to benefit from my death. I had been the perfect victim, so eager to be needed and loved that I had ignored every red flag, every warning sign, every instinct that told me something was wrong. But I was done being a victim. The next morning, I called David and told him I wanted to meet with him and Anna to discuss our family situation. I suggested a neutral location, a coffee shop in Manhattan that was convenient for them, but public enough that they couldn't make a scene. "Mom, I'm so glad you want to talk," David said, relief evident in his voice. "Anna's been so worried about you. She keeps asking when you're coming back." "I'm sure she has," I thought grimly. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back where we could have some privacy without being completely isolated. I ordered tea and sat calmly, watching other customers come and go, preparing myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. David and Anna arrived together, both looking anxious and hopeful. Anna was dressed carefully in what appeared to be her most fragile, invalid-like outfit, complete with a scarf wrapped around her neck and a slight tremor in her hands that I now suspected was entirely performative. "Mom," Anna said as soon as they sat down, reaching across the table to grasp my hands. "I've missed you so much. I don't understand what happened. Did I do something wrong?" Her touch felt cold and calculated now, nothing like the warm affection I had once associated with her. I gently pulled my hands away. "I spoke with Dr. Rodriguez," I said simply. The effect of those words was immediate and dramatic. Anna's face went white, David's mouth fell open, and for a moment, neither of them seemed to breathe. "She told me about your real condition, Anna. She told me that you've been healthy for months. She told me that there's no medical reason for you to need the kind of care I've been providing." Anna began to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I also spoke with my bank and my insurance agent. I know about the money David has been taking from my accounts. I know about the financial planning that includes my death as a solution to your debt problems. I know about the conversations you've been having about how much you'll inherit when I die. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, the coffee shop continued its normal operation. Baristas calling out orders, customers chatting at other tables, the ordinary sounds of people going about their daily lives. But at our table, time seemed suspended. Finally, David found his voice. "Mom, I can explain. Please do," I said calmly. "I'd like to understand how my son and daughter-in-law decided that the best way to solve their financial problems was to work their elderly mother to death while stealing her money." David's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the little boy I had raised and loved unconditionally. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It just got out of hand. We were desperate, and Anna's medical bills were so expensive at first, and we thought— "You thought what?" I asked. "That I wouldn't notice? That I was too old and stupid to figure out what you were doing? That I deserved to be treated like this?" Anna finally spoke, her voice small and shaky. "We never wanted to hurt you. We love you. Your family." I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its bitterness. "This is how you treat family? By lying, stealing, and hoping for their death?" "We weren't hoping." Anna started to protest. "I heard you talking to Bobby," I said firmly. "I heard you calculate how much money you'd have when I died. I heard you talk about my death as if it were a business opportunity." Anna's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Her face hardened, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold and sharp. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, we need money. Yes, we've made mistakes. But you're not exactly innocent in all this. You've been using your money to control people your entire life, making us dependent on you, making us feel guilty when we need help, acting like you're such a martyr for doing things no one even asked you to do." The accusation was so unexpected, so completely contrary to my understanding of our relationship, that for a moment I couldn't respond. I began. "You never what?" Anna continued, her voice gaining strength and venom. "You never made it clear that every dollar you gave us came with strings attached. You never made us feel like we owed you our entire lives because you helped us out a few times. You never used your generosity as a way to make yourself indispensable." David was looking back and forth between us with growing alarm. "Anna, stop." "No, I'm tired of pretending," Anna said, turning to face him. "Your mother has been manipulating us for years, using money and guilt to control our lives. And when we finally found a way to get some independence, she acts like we're the villains." I stared at this woman I had thought I knew, seeing her clearly for the first time. The false fragility was gone, replaced by a coldness that made my skin crawl. This was who Anna really was. Behind the performance of illness and gratitude, this was the person who had been calculating the value of my death while I held her hand and brought her soup. "Is that really what you think?" I asked quietly. "That helping your family, giving you money when you needed it, taking care of you when you were supposedly sick, is that manipulation to you?" "It is when you use it to make us feel obligated to you forever," Anna replied. "It is when you act like we should be grateful for every scrap of affection you give us." I looked at David, who was staring down at the table, his face flushed with shame or embarrassment or both. "Is that how you see it too?" I asked him. "Have I been manipulating you all these years by loving you and trying to help you?" David finally looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something that broke my heart completely. It wasn't love or regret or even guilt. It was resentment. Years of resentment that I had never suspected existed. "Sometimes it felt like that, Mom," he said quietly. "Like we could never be truly adult or independent because you were always there, always helping, always making it clear how much you were sacrificing for us. It was suffocating sometimes." The words hit me like physical blows. In trying to be the perfect mother, the generous grandmother, the selfless family member, I had somehow created exactly the opposite of what I intended. Instead of love and gratitude, I had inspired resentment and manipulation. Instead of bringing us closer together, my generosity had driven us apart. But even through the pain of that realization, I could see the fundamental unfairness of their perspective. Yes, perhaps I had been too giving, too eager to help, too willing to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. But that didn't justify lying to me, stealing from me, or planning to benefit from my death. It didn't excuse the months of exploitation and emotional abuse I had endured. "So because you felt suffocated by my love," I said slowly, "you decided the appropriate response was to steal my money and work me to death?" Neither of them had an answer for that. I stood up from the table, feeling older than my 73 years, but also somehow stronger than I had in months. "I want the money you took from my accounts returned immediately," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I want all power of attorney documents revoked. I want to be removed from any financial planning that involves my death. And I want you to stay away from me until you can treat me with the basic respect that any human being deserves." "Mom," David started to say. I'm not finished, I continued. I've spent my entire adult life believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a good mother meant giving everything I had even when it hurt. But I've learned something important these past few weeks. Love that requires one person to exhaust themselves for the benefit of others isn't love at all. It's exploitation. I pulled my coat on and picked up my purse, feeling the weight of decades of misplaced obligation lifting from my shoulders. When you're ready to have a real relationship with me, one based on mutual respect rather than financial benefit, you know where to find me. Until then, I'll be busy learning how to live for myself for the first time in my life. I walked out of that coffee shop and into the cold January air, leaving behind not just Anna and David, but the version of myself that had made their exploitation possible. Behind me, I could hear Anna's voice rising in what sounded like genuine panic for the first time since I'd known her. "Wait, we can work this out," she called after me, but I didn't turn around. Over the next several weeks, I began the process of rebuilding my life on my own terms. I worked with my lawyer to recover as much of the stolen money as possible, and to establish legal protections that would prevent future financial abuse. I changed my will to reflect my new understanding of my relationships with my family members. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping older adults establish healthy boundaries with adult children. Most importantly, I began to rediscover who I was when I wasn't defined by my usefulness to other people. I joined a book club at the Queens Public Library, where I met other women my age who had fascinating stories and perspectives to share. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy managing everyone else's needs. I began volunteering at a local food bank, where I could help people who genuinely needed assistance, rather than people who were manipulating my desire to be needed. Margaret became a true friend during this period, someone I could talk to honestly about the pain and confusion of rebuilding family relationships in my 70s. Her wisdom and perspective helped me understand that I wasn't losing my family by establishing boundaries. I was finally creating the possibility for real, honest relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Bobby was the first family member to reach out to me with genuine remorse and a desire to repair our relationship. He called 6 weeks after the coffee shop confrontation, his voice shaky with emotion. "Grandma, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," he said. "I know I should have spoken up when I heard Anna talking about you that way. I know I should have told Dad what was really going on. I was scared and confused, but that's no excuse for letting them treat you like that." His honesty and accountability meant everything to me. Here was a young man who was willing to take responsibility for his role in the situation and work toward making things right. "I don't blame you for being confused, Bobby," I told him. "You were put in an impossible situation by adults who should have known better. But I appreciate your apology, and I'd like to rebuild our relationship if you're willing." Over the following months, Bobby and I developed a new kind of relationship, one where I was his grandmother rather than his bank account or insurance policy. He visited regularly, not because he needed something from me, but because he genuinely enjoyed my company. He helped me with small tasks around my apartment, and I helped him with college applications and relationship advice. It was the kind of intergenerational relationship I had always hoped for but had never experienced when it was tangled up with financial obligation and guilt. David took much longer to come around, and when he finally did reach out, it was clear that his motivations were still mixed. He missed the financial support I had provided, and Anna's condition had mysteriously worsened again once they realized I wasn't coming back to provide free care. But gradually, through careful conversations and clear boundaries, we began to rebuild some trust. The process was slow and sometimes painful. David had to acknowledge the extent of his betrayal and take steps to make amends. He had to learn to relate to me as a person, rather than as a resource. Most difficult of all, he had to confront his own resentment and entitlement that had made the exploitation seem justified in his mind. Anna, on the other hand, never showed any genuine remorse for her actions. When it became clear that I wouldn't be returning to my role as unpaid caregiver and financial support, she quickly recovered from her mysterious illness and returned to full-time work. She made a few half-hearted attempts to reconcile, but they were clearly motivated by financial need rather than any real desire to repair our relationship. Eventually, David had to make a choice between his relationship with me and his marriage to Anna. It wasn't an ultimatum I gave him, but rather a natural consequence of the fact that Anna couldn't tolerate having me in their lives without being able to exploit me. She resented my boundaries, my refusal to provide unlimited financial support, and my insistence on being treated with basic respect. The marriage ended in divorce about a year after our coffee shop confrontation, and while I felt sad for David and Bobby, I couldn't honestly say I was surprised. A relationship built on manipulation and exploitation was never going to survive in an environment of honesty and accountability. But the most important relationship I rebuilt during this period was the one with myself. For months after ending my role as Anna's caregiver, I struggled with feelings of guilt and doubt. Had I been too harsh? Had I abandoned family members who genuinely needed my help? Had I been selfish and unforgiving when I should have been compassionate and understanding? My therapist helped me work through these feelings and recognize them as the lingering effects of years of conditioning that had taught me to prioritize other people's needs over my own well-being. She helped me understand that healthy relationships require reciprocity, that love without respect is not really love at all, and that protecting myself from exploitation was not just acceptable, but necessary. Gradually, I began to feel comfortable with the choices I had made. I had not abandoned my family out of spite or selfishness. I had simply refused to continue participating in my own exploitation. I had chosen to value my own life and well-being as much as I valued theirs, which was radical for someone who had been taught that self-sacrifice was the highest virtue. As I write this, it's been 18 months since that Christmas, when I overheard Anna's whispered calculations about my death. 18 months since I began the painful but necessary process of reclaiming my life and my dignity. I'm healthier now than I've been in years. The constant stress and exhaustion that characterized my months as Anna's caregiver have been replaced by a sense of peace and purpose that I didn't know was possible at my age. I sleep through the night without worrying about medication schedules or emergency phone calls. I eat meals I've prepared for my own pleasure, rather than out of obligation to someone else. I spend my days doing things that interest and fulfill me, rather than tasks assigned by other people's needs. But the most significant change is internal. I no longer measure my worth by how much I can sacrifice for others. I no longer believe that love requires me to exhaust myself in service to people who don't reciprocate my care and respect. I no longer accept relationships where I'm valued only for what I can provide rather than who I am. This hasn't made me selfish or uncaring. If anything, I'm more generous now than I was before, because my generosity comes from a place of choice rather than obligation. When I help friends or volunteer in my community, I do so because I want to contribute something positive to the world, not because I'm trying to earn love or prove my worth. I still love my son, and I hope we continue to rebuild our relationship in a healthier way. I still care about Bobby's future and want to be part of his life as he becomes an adult. I even feel a kind of distant compassion for Anna, though I have no desire to ever be close to her again. But I love myself too now, in a way I never did during all those years of self-sacrifice. I value my own time, energy, and well-being. I protect my boundaries and my resources. I insist on being treated with the same kindness and respect I offer to others. Some people might call this selfish, especially in a culture that teaches women of my generation that our highest calling is to serve others without regard for our own needs. But I've learned that healthy selfishness is actually the foundation of healthy relationships. When I take care of myself, I'm more capable of genuinely caring for others. When I'm clear about my own needs and boundaries, I can engage with people honestly, rather than with the resentment that builds up from constant self-sacrifice. Today is Christmas Eve again, exactly 1 year after the Christmas I spent with Margaret and her daughter, instead of being exploited by my own family. This year I'm spending the holiday with a group of friends from my book club, people who know me and value me for who I am rather than what I can do for them. We're cooking together, sharing stories, and celebrating the kind of chosen family that enriches life rather than draining it. Tomorrow, Bobby will come for Christmas dinner, and David might join us if he can manage to treat me with respect and honesty. We're building something new together, a relationship based on genuine affection rather than financial obligation. It's smaller than the family I once thought I had, but it's real in a way that my old relationships never were. As I look ahead to whatever years I have left, I feel hopeful in a way I haven't experienced since I was young. I have friends who enjoy my company, activities that challenge and interest me, and a sense of purpose that comes from my own choices rather than other people's expectations. I have enough money to live comfortably because I'm no longer subsidizing other people's poor financial decisions. I have energy for things I care about because I'm no longer exhausting myself on tasks that ultimately benefited others more than they benefited me. Most importantly, I have self-respect. I know that I deserve to be treated well, and I'm willing to enforce that standard even when it means making difficult choices about relationships. I know that my life has value independent of my usefulness to other people. I know that love without respect is not love at all, and that I don't have to accept crumbs of affection from people who see me primarily as a resource to be exploited. If you're listening to this story and recognizing pieces of your own experience, I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your life. It doesn't matter if you're 60 or 70 or 80 years old. It doesn't matter if you've been playing the role of the selfless caregiver or the endlessly generous parent, or the uncomplaining family member for decades. You still have the right to be treated with dignity. You still have the right to establish boundaries. You still have the right to refuse to participate in your own exploitation. Yes, it will be difficult. People who have been benefiting from your self-sacrifice will resist your efforts to change the dynamic. They'll use guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail to try to restore the status quo. They'll tell you you're being selfish, ungrateful, or cruel. They'll try to convince you that you're abandoning them in their time of need. But remember that their resistance is actually proof that your boundaries are working. People only fight this hard to maintain arrangements that benefit them at your expense. If your relationships were truly reciprocal and healthy, your family members would support your efforts to take better care of yourself rather than fighting against them. The path forward isn't easy, but it's possible. Start by identifying one small boundary you can establish, one small way you can prioritize your own well-being. Maybe it's saying no to a request that would exhaust you. Maybe it's asking for help instead of always being the helper. Maybe it's spending money on something you want instead of always giving it to family members who claim to need it more than you do. Pay attention to how people respond to your boundaries. People who truly love you will respect your efforts to take care of yourself, even if they're disappointed that you can't do everything for them anymore. People who are exploiting you will escalate their demands and manipulation when they realize their tactics aren't working. Get support from people outside your family if possible. Friends, therapists, support groups, or even online communities can provide perspective and encouragement when your family members are telling you that you're wrong to prioritize your own needs. Sometimes we need outside voices to help us recognize that we deserve better treatment than we've been accepting. And remember that changing these patterns is a process, not a single decision. You'll probably backslide sometimes, give in to manipulation, or doubt your own judgment. That's normal and human. The goal isn't perfection, but progress toward healthier relationships and better self-care. I wish someone had told me these things 30 years ago, when I first started the pattern of endless self-sacrifice that nearly destroyed me. I wish I had understood that love doesn't require martyrdom, that healthy families support each other's well-being rather than exploiting it, and that I had the right to be treated with kindness by the people who claim to love me. But I'm grateful to have learned these lessons now, even in my 70s. I'm grateful for the time I have left to live according to these principles. I'm grateful for the relationships I've built based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I'm grateful for the peace and self-respect I've found after decades of searching for worth through sacrifice. Your story doesn't have to end the way mine began. You don't have to wait until you're 73 to start valuing your own life and well-being. You don't have to exhaust yourself trying to earn love from people who see you as a resource rather than a person. You deserve better. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve relationships that energize you rather than drain you. You deserve to spend your time and resources on things that matter to you, not just on solving other people's problems. And you have the right to insist on that treatment, even if it means disappointing people who have been counting on your endless availability and generosity. The whisper I overheard that Christmas night shattered everything I thought I knew about my family and my worth as a person. But in the end, it also set me free. Free from the exhausting cycle of sacrifice and exploitation. Free from the desperate need to prove my worth through service to others. Free to discover who I am when I'm not defined by my usefulness to people who don't truly care about my well-being. That freedom has been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every relationship that didn't survive the transition to healthier boundaries. Because now, finally, I'm living my life instead of simply serving other people's needs. I hope that if you find yourself in a similar situation, you'll find the courage to make the changes necessary to reclaim your own life. You deserve that freedom too. You deserve a life that belongs to you, relationships that nourish rather than drain you, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you're valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. Have you ever lived through something similar or known someone who has experienced this kind of family exploitation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you at all, please like this video and subscribe to help me continue sharing these important messages. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is realize we're not alone in our struggles, and that there's always hope for a better way forward, no matter how old we are or how long we've been living in unhealthy patterns. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for giving me this space to share what I've learned. And remember, it's never too late to start putting yourself first. You're worth it.